Could you tell us under what conditions those projects can be deployed without government support? And how can you bring offshore wind costs down even further?
Yeah, I think there's a number of conditions that have, so to speak, been factored into bidding. One of them, and I think the drivers behind it are very clear, there is a very long timeline to execution of these projects. Normally in Europe you have a bid and you need to execute more or less the next day. That's not the case in Germany. You bid, you almost put down the pen for a couple of years and then you pick the project up and realize it. And projecting of what continues to happen in our industry until the date at which we need to deliver these projects, we know that we will be able to realize these projects with the next generation of wind turbines, which is a very significant cost driver. So therefore, these are kind of the key ingredients for bidding on that level are, of course, the fact that we continue to bring down the cost and we will be able to deliver at costs that are even lower than the cost level we've seen in recent bids in the Netherlands or in Denmark. Another very important ingredient is, and Mr. Baake has said that before, is of course that we can continue to believe that there is going to be a wholesale power price in Germany that somehow sets what or gives the right incentives as a price should do, which is it should incentivize generators to deploy infrastructure. It should at the same time also incentivize consumers to strive for more energy efficiency. And on the latest part, I fully appreciate that we heard before that there's a lot of trust in that system. Let me also say there's a bit of transpiration also, especially from the financing party's part. So the capital market is very much, I would say, on the one hand, confident, on the other hand, a little bit worried that can the German wholesale power price or can the European wholesale market indeed play that role? Do we have a power price that continues to give the right incentives? And can we dare to make billion investment decisions based on what could be seen as a pretty volatile basis? So I do not want to underestimate the technical part, but however, I think we can be very confident that the continuous cost reduction story will last and will continue. I think the part where the industry probably is a bit more nervous is the wholesale price.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Samuel. Jens, Samuel's talked about the importance of the developments in innovation turbine technology. Could you tell us something, please, about the importance of turbine size to improve capacity factors and maximize energy output? What are you expecting on this front, and what should the supply chain be prepared for?
Yes. First of all, I would like just to look back 3 or 4 years and look at the tremendous development we have had in offshore wind. We have basically seen a lot of innovation, and we have seen a lot of innovation around new technology platforms or new bigger turbines. We can also put it that way. Combined with competition and then a bidding market has been very, very important to drive the price down. We definitely believe that innovation and also looking into newer technology platforms, bigger turbines, will continue, because we all know that bigger turbines will be an important factor of driving down the cost. But when we introduce new technology platform, new turbines into the market, we have to be very careful that it's reliable, that it's tested, proven technology, because building trust into the investor communities, the developers, and also the government will be extremely important for our industry. And then we should not remember that we are a whole chain. We have suppliers into our factory with electrical component. It can be gearboxes, it can be a lot of things. We also have a supply chain helping us installing the turbines, lifting the turbines. So the whole chain have to be able to carry new technology. And openness and collaboration is extremely important for us to drive in innovation and new technology into the market. And the last point, which is important, is to have a visible volume in the market. Because if we have to go and convince suppliers, if we have to go and convince the whole chain to invest in the future, to invest in new technology solutions, we need to be able to prove and convince the whole chain that there is a stable volume in the market.
Keith, the Minister, the State Secretary and the Permanent Secretary all talked about the importance of having the right support mechanisms for offshore wind. What in your view is the ideal design for a support mechanism, bearing in mind the needs of the end consumer, of course, and bearing in mind the specific needs of offshore wind compared to other renewables?
Okay, I think that the point you made there is really important, is that as an industry we need to remember that we're here to produce power for consumers. So the whole structure of the industry, the structure of framework support mechanisms need to take that into account. At the end of the day, what consumers want is reliable energy, affordable energy, but they also want renewable energy. And consumers do want that and have a demand for that. In terms of a framework, and I would talk more about frameworks than support mechanisms, to me the framework has to try and create a level playing field for investment in the sector, in the whole of the energy sector, taking account of levels of capital, taking account of time frames, and taking account of carbon reduction and the ability to reduce carbon. But the most important thing for any framework is it then lets competition deliver. Because it is competition that will create the success for the future of the market. It is competition that's delivered all of the success this industry has shown to date in terms of the creation of jobs, in terms of the investment in infrastructure, all the way through to port infrastructure, factories, manufacturing. In terms of innovation, competition will deliver innovation. And then in terms of value and cost reduction, it is competition that will deliver that. So the most important thing to me is all of the frameworks need to allow the market to compete and companies to compete, and that is what will carry on driving this industry forward.
Michael, as costs come down and more offshore wind is deployed, energy systems need to deal with those greater volumes of variable energy production. What, in your view, are the priorities for system integration of offshore wind, and what's the role of the manufacturers, companies like yourselves, in helping to manage the integration of variable offshore wind energy?
Correct. Offshore wind is variable, but very predictable, because you can actually predict pretty precisely what will be the production of tomorrow and the day after. And then back to the point, I have been so many years around in the wind that when I started, it was a matter from the grid operators to kick the turbines off the grid if there was a mistake in the grid. And then we were asked to develop the turbines to stay on the grid, support the grid, strengthening the grid. And what we do need with the grid operators, with the more volume of offshore wind going into the grid, is continue the innovation jointly, so that you work with smarter grid, you work with smarter solutions, you work with storage. Then basically it will be unlimited what you can put in. We have had this in Denmark, where we have had 100% of offshore wind or renewable wind going into the grid. So it's a matter of driving the innovation and know what basically system you are to set up. Then we can drive the turbine technology, supporting that part jointly with the grid operators.
Thank you. Samuel, we've heard already about the great efforts that 10 European countries have been making over the last year now to align their regulation on offshore wind, to align their support for the deployment of offshore wind. One of the commitments that has been made is for the coordination between the 10 countries of their offshore wind tenders. How significant would that be for a company like yours?
Well, I think that would be very significant, because today there is no coordination, and we can see the effects of that, where we don't have a continuous and kind of visible string of auctions in the different countries, but we have clusters of auctions almost happening at the same moment. And this will, on the one hand, from the supply chain and point of view, this will be an issue if we cannot deal with that. So if we have a more coordinated timeline for these different tenders and auctions from a supply chain point of view, it will help us to have these ups and downs in the volumes, and therefore it will allow for much better planning for suppliers and contractors. So that will be beneficial to all of us. We will not go into over and under capacity and in the end have factories that are part-time idle, which is clearly somehow going to be reflected in the cost. From a developer side, today's system is including the risk, if you will, that you have to commit or hand in an auction while you do not know whether the last one you handed in, whether you were successful or not, or at least in certain circumstances, this can be the case. And of course, you risk having a commitment on your balance sheet or having a number of tenders out there without knowing what's the outcome, and you risk to kind of make commitments on your balance sheet, which potentially would be too high. And then you would potentially stay away from a next auction because you say, I haven't seen the outcome of the previous ones, and had you known the outcome, you wouldn't have stayed away. So it could also hamper competition. It could lead to people staying away, to be prudent, and therefore I think better coordination will be a massive step forward.
Jens, economies of scale, industrialization are critical to cost reduction. That means having large volumes. What volumes do you think are necessary to keep up the current pace of cost reduction?
Well, we have already started the industrialization of offshore wind. Offshore wind is now being more and more separated as a supply chain from onshore wind. But if we look at it from 2020 to 2030, the low end of the scenario will be around 4 gigawatt for the European market annually. Yes, we will be able to improve. Yes, we will be able to develop. But if the market can go to a level between 6 and 7 gigawatt per year, that will make a big difference for the supply chain in Europe. Then we also have the new markets coming up, which is extremely interesting. In the beginning, they will develop based on the supply chains in the European market. But when they get more stable, when the new market get more volume, then they will also be able to even faster build up their own supply chain. And a market between 4 and 800 megawatt will probably be where you will be able to really drive down the cost and also build up the local supply chain. So stable volume, very important. As Samuel said, building the stable volume with coordination between different areas, different countries will also be very important.
So somewhere in between 4,000 and 8,000 megawatts per annum. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll have heard Maroš Šefčovič talk in his video about a joint statement. This is a joint statement that the 4 event ambassadors, the 3 government principals that you've heard this morning, and 25 CEOs of the offshore wind industry are signing today. This statement sets out very clearly the industry's intention to deploy at least 60 gigawatts of new offshore wind during the 2020s. It sets out also very clearly the welcome from the 3 governments that have signed the statement of this industry intention. Both the industry and the government signatories of this statement have committed to deploy significant new volumes of offshore wind, and they call together on the European Union to fund strategic joint projects. It's a very positive development. This is the first time, in fact, that the industry, the wind industry together, whether offshore or onshore, has signed a joint statement with government representatives on this level of ambition. So many thanks to all of you who have been involved in that. Keith, if I could turn to you now. The flagship report that I mentioned at the start that we're launching today says that offshore wind could, in theory, meet 1/4 of Europe's power demand at a very competitive cost. I think I said price earlier, I meant cost of 54 euros per megawatt hour by the year 2030, in theory. If you had one recommendation to policymakers to help unleash this huge potential, what would it be?
So what I would say to any policymaker or government out there is, show me a sector that's delivering more power, delivering more jobs, delivering greater cost reduction, delivering more innovation, delivering more infrastructure. I don't think there's anything else out there that's doing what offshore wind does just now. So if you're a policymaker or a government or an official and you want jobs and you want innovation and you want infrastructure, then open your market to offshore wind and we'll come and deliver.
Thank you for that very clear answer. I may in a moment turn to the other three panelists and ask them what their single one recommendation would be as well. But before I do, Michael, if I could turn to you. The EU member states, as we've heard this morning, notably from Maroš Šefčovič, are now writing their national energy and climate change action plans, setting out what they're doing on energy and climate change from now up until 2030. These national energy and climate action plans go under the very neat acronym that will appeal, I'm sure, to a UK audience of NECAPs. Now, the officials that are drafting these plans are looking for an energy supply that is going to be clean, competitive, and reliable, of course. Can offshore wind deliver?
Absolutely. And I think you just said it, Keith, that we can deliver and we have delivered. If you look at what we have done in the whole area, it's creating a lot of jobs, it's creating infrastructure. So basically, this industry can deliver two storylines. It can deliver the job, the economy, talking to that kind of people, and then we can deliver the clean part, talking to another part of the global citizens. If you go US, then you know you need to talk jobs, infrastructure, and these things, at least in this period. If you talk here, then you can combine a little bit more educational, the climate discussion with the job creation. This industry can do what we are here for, making real what real matters for the society, clean energy.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask you now, Samuel, please, what your one single policy recommendation to the three governments and all the other governments of the European Union would be to help us deliver this huge potential that is in your flagship report that we're publishing today?
I think it would very much be the continuity and the visibility of what governments do plan and do have in terms of ambition for the future of their offshore wind or tapping into their offshore wind potential. I think so far we've been living in a system where 4-year government cycles was about the visibility which the industry had, and I would say it's remarkable that in that stop-and-go environment we were able to achieve what we have achieved. So if that would go away and we would stop this stop-and-go mode and we would rather go in a continuous mode with a also clear landmark ambition set for 2030, I think that would be extremely helpful for the industry.
And Jens, what would your single policy recommendation be?
I have to echo Samuel that it is visibility and volume in the pipeline. Then we can have further investment, we can create much more local jobs, we can do local education, we can take in young trainees at our factory as our service side. So long-term visibility is a great opportunity for this industry.
And Michael, yours?
Definitely predictability and volume in the market. And then I think it is fair to say that a subsidy will be needed short-term getting there. This industry have delivered. We have beaten coal, we have beaten nuclear in this decade, and next decade we will beat gas, and then basically we are fully where we should be, heading towards the target of subsidy-free.
Okay, government representatives, I think you have some clear recommendations there. I'd like to ask all of you, gentlemen, to share with us something very specific from your own company experience and perspective about jobs and growth. We've talked about it a lot this morning. There are nearly 100,000 people working full-time directly in offshore wind across Europe. We've got not only all the industry and government people in the room, we have journalists in the room as well, and we all like to hear real-life stories. And your companies will have real-life stories about investments you've made in different parts of Europe that have created jobs and growth, but have really helped to put dynamism into local communities, perhaps previously deprived local communities. Could I ask you each, please, to give us one specific example? Michael, maybe I could start with you, because you have a big investment in this country.
Yeah, here and in Germany and many other places, big investments. And it's innovation, and then continue innovation. That's what we need to drive.
Keith, could you give us a real-world example of...
Sure. So I'll answer your question in a little bit of a different way. To me, the most important thing and one of the biggest challenges, particularly in the United Kingdom, is getting children and particularly girls involved in engineering. And this sector, this industry, offers the UK one of the best opportunities to go and engage all the way down from primary school up through secondary school to get people engaged into studying engineering and coming into this sector and seeing the jobs in this sector. So the most important thing I think we can all do, and everybody in this room, is get out there and educate and engage and infuse the children of the future, because that's what will create jobs, it develops skills, that's what brings the innovation through to the sector, and it's also what creates the future for the sector.
Mm-hmm. Jens, what would be your one specific example of how MHI Vestas has supported jobs growth, community development?
Let's talk about UK. For me personally, it is to see the highly skilled young people and how many young people, both engineers and in all parts of our factories and our service, basically organizations, how motivated they are, how important it is for them that it is renewable clean energy, and how fast they actually get into the jobs and understand the industry and excel. That's a great experience for me personally.
Mm-hmm. And Samuel, finally.
Well, a very personal one. In the 1990s, I worked for ABB Power Generation as a commissioning engineer, and I was sent to Grimsby for the Killingholme combined cycle power plant, which at that point in time was, in terms of protecting the environment, top notch. Grimsby, nothing against Grimsby, but in the 1990s it didn't look great. We could clearly see the decline that this beautiful city had gone through in the recent years. Now today, I'm after almost 20 years back in Grimsby, where we have recently said it's our offshore hub for the East Coast. So a lot of, not only Dong Energy, a lot of other developers have recently come to Grimsby and discovered this is a fantastic place to have their construction and operation and maintenance activities based, jobs being created, long-term jobs, training programs being run, a lot of second and third tier suppliers and contractors benefiting from the industry coming back to Grimsby for a future project. So when I compare how I see the harbour area in Grimsby today, and if I recall memories from the 1990s, that's a very personal history for me, where I see what this industry has brought to deprived coastal areas.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. It's very nice that you're able to include those details that bring real colour and life to the great work that the industry is doing, and in particular to include some examples from the United Kingdom, of course. Could I very briefly say a word of thanks to Hugh McNeil and all of his team from Renewable UK for all the excellent work that you have done to put this event together. We've already expressed our solidarity with you and all of the UK industry. And could I thank you, our 4 excellent event ambassadors. Could I invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to join me in giving them a warm round of applause, please.